Okay, I seem to be, well, not finished. I seem to be finished with the preparatory materials. So, hello everybody. Hello, who we got on board here already? Timothy and Jared and Melissa and Kelly and Angela and Josh and Jerry and Gabriel and Nancy and Barban and Jerry. Hi everybody. This is me. Um, I'm gonna finish up the story tonight. Um, it's Hi, Ron. Hi, Mike. It's been a long and stressful weekend. I won't bother you with any of the details because they're not interesting to anybody. Um, but just want to tell you we are all well. We are all still healthy, and as far as we know, still disease free here. I never thought that would be my main resume builder in life, disease free, but you take what you can get. And right now, that's, I guess, one of the best things that any of us can say. So as far as I know, that's where we all are. And I am going to enjoy that as best I can. Hope the same is true for all of you. Hello, Jeremy. I'm just reading names as they pop up here. Hope the same is true for all of you, that you are well and keeping safe and being kind and good to those around you, because God knows it gets tough sometimes when our regular way of life is disrupted by as many things as have been disrupting it of late. Geez, long time now. I'm trying to think. I think we've been doing these Sunday readings for, is that 3 months now? I can't remember. Anyway, quite a few altogether. I think also, by the way, that somebody was putting these on YouTube. So if you've missed one and you don't want to scroll all the way down my Facebook page trying to find them, although basically I think that as far as I know, it's an endless scroll. But anyway, there also should be available on YouTube, and as well as probably a few other things from over the years. God only knows how embarrassing they are. So please don't tell me if you find anything really, really horrible. I don't actually want to know. That said, I do want to get on with the reading. Sorry, as I said, I'm a bit verklempt tonight. But I'm going to go back to reading Child of an Ancient City. For those of you who didn't catch it last week or haven't read the story, I mentioned that this story actually has a long and somewhat complex history. It was originally written with all the main characters being French crusaders who were at the Battle of Nicopolis, and after the terrible defeat that the crusaders took there, they were forced to wander back home again in a small band through the mountains of Transylvania. And we all know that the mountains of Transylvania are not a great place to be wandering, especially in the 11th or no, that was like the 13th century. Anyway, but then at some point, somebody asked me if I wanted to submit a story to an Arabian Nights anthology, and I did. And I took the Crusader story and I changed everybody in it into characters from roughly the time of the Arabian Nights, which is about the 9th century, centered around Baghdad and the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. And the one problem with that, and that's why I'm mentioning this now for those who, will wonder why am I giving so much background, is that the story was originally written, as I said, about French crusaders. There's a lot of drinking in it, especially at the beginning and the ending. And because of that, it was a bit of an awkward fit with the now Islamic setting. However, there was still, for the first few hundred years of Islam, quite a bit of drinking, especially among the privileged. And the very strong tenets against alcohol did not kind of become quite so rigid for a while. So I soothe myself that there is some historical truth to what I did here. But anyway, as I said, if I was going to write it all over again now, 25 years later or whatever, I would probably turn it back to a Crusader story. But anyway, so these people are not Crusaders. They are a merchant caravan that is on their way to I've forgotten where exactly it is, but somewhere in the Balkan area, and they are attacked by bandits, and many of them are killed, and their treasure that they were taking is stolen, and they are forced to make their way back. And at first, it was just kind of miserable. They kidnap a local boy and local shepherd, and he helps to lead them. But he's also hates the place and tells them he would never have come here on his own in these forested mountains. And then people start dying. They start disappearing, and then they start dying. And at a certain point, the shepherd boy admits that he has seen something lurking in the shadows outside their camp at night, and that it is what he calls a vampire, which, yeah, you can figure that one out. So anyway, as the story goes on, the main guy, Masrur, goes to him. Masrur and Ibn Fahad are sort of the two main guys. Masrur goes to him, the shepherd, and says, what can we do about this? And the local boy basically says, nothing. We don't go here. When they're out, we stay indoors. And he hints that they kind of like drape garlic around the doors, but of course they're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no garlic to be found. So he says the only other thing that he's heard that sometimes works is telling stories. That there are legends and myths that the vampire will stop to listen to stories being told around campfires by men. And so Masrur leaps at this only option that they're all going to survive, because they're already down to like half a dozen people or something. And they begin telling stories every night. And they are really beginning to run out of stories. And eventually the vampire makes an appearance after several days and comes to their camp and actually speaks to them for the first time. And the vampire says to them, I propose that we make a bargain, said the vampire, a wager. And that was the last line of this previous half of the story. So now we're going to return to Child of an Ancient City. This is the original short story version. There is also a very nice job done by Nina Kariki Hoffman when we expanded it into a short novel. And Nina wrote a lot of brilliant stories to stretch it out. But I'm not reading that version. But if you get a chance, the book is still around, at least used sometimes or occasionally elsewhere. You can find it. Just to see what Nina did, which is wonderful stuff. She's a very fine writer. Anyway, so here we are. It's been a very rough time. Almost everybody's dead. They're at the campfire, and the vampire has appeared, although they still have not really seen him yet. He's up on a tree limb at this point, and he says, I propose that we make a bargain, a wager. I had found my sword, and Ibn Fahad had drawn his as well, but we both knew we could not kill a thing like this. A red-eyed demon that could leap 5 cubits in the air and had learned to speak our language in a fortnight. No bargains with Shaitan, spat the clerk Abdallah. What do you mean? I demanded, inwardly marveling that such an unlikely dialogue should ever take place on the earth. Pay no attention to the... I curled my lip. Holy man. Abdallah shot me a venomous glance. Hear me, then, the creature said, and in the deep recesses of the tree seemed once more to unfold and stretch great wings. Hear me. I must kill to live, and my nature is such that I cannot choose to die. That is the way of things. I offer you now, however, the chance to win safe passage out of my domain, these hills. We shall have a contest, a wager, if you like. If you best me, you shall go freely, and I shall turn once more to the musty, slow-blooded peasants of the local valleys. Ibn Fahad laughed bitterly. What? Are we to fight you then? So be it. I would snap your spine like a dry branch, croaked the black shape. No, you have held me these many nights telling stories. It is storytelling that will win you safe
passage. We will have a contest, one that will suit my whims. We shall relate the saddest of all stories. That is my demand. You may tell 3. I will tell only 1. If you can best me with any or all, you shall go unhindered by me. And if we lose, I cried, and who shall judge? You may judge, it said, and the deep, thick voice took on a tone of grim amusement. If you can look into my eyes and tell me that you have bested my sad tale, why then I shall believe you. If you lose, it said, then one of your number shall come to me and pay the price of defeat. Those are my terms. Otherwise, I shall hunt you down one at a time. For in truth, your present tale-telling has begun to lose my interest. Ibn Fahad darted a worried look in my direction. Fawn and the others stared at the demon shape in mute terror and astonishment. We shall give you our decision at sunset tomorrow, I said. We must be allowed to think and talk. As you wish, said the vampire. But if you accept my challenge, the game must begin then. After all, we have only a few more days to spend together. And at this, the terrible creature laughed, a sound like the bark being pulled from the trunk of a rotted tree. Then the shadow was gone. In the end, we had to accede to the creature's wager, of course. We knew he was not wrong in his assessment of us. We were just wagging our beards over the nightly campfire, no longer even listening to our own tales. Whatever magic had held the vampire at bay had drained out like meal from a torn sack. I racked my poor brains all afternoon for stories of sadness, but could think of nothing that seemed to fit, that seemed significant enough for the vital purpose at hand. I had been doing most of the talking for several nights running and had exhausted virtually every story I had ever heard, and I was never much good at making them up, as Ibn Fahad will attest. Yes, go ahead and smile, old comrade. Actually, it was Ibn Fahad who volunteered the first tale. I asked him what it was, but he would not tell me. Let me save what potency it may have, he said. The under-vizier Walid also had something he deemed suitable. I was racking my brain fruitlessly for a third time when young Fawn piped up that he would tell a tale himself. I looked him over, his rosy cheeks and long-lashed eyes, and asked him what he could possibly know of sadness. Even as I spoke, I realized my cruelty, standing as we all did in the shadow of death, or worse, but it was too late to take it back. Fawn did not flinch. He was folding his cloak as he sat cross-ankled on the ground, folding and unfolding it. He looked up and said, I shall tell a sad story about love. All the saddest stories are about love. These young, shaved tales, I thought, although I was not 10 years his senior. A sad story about love. But I could not think of better and was forced to give in. We walked as far and as fast as we could that day, as if hoping that somehow, against all reason, we should find ourselves out of the gloomy, mist-sodden hills. But when twilight came, the vast bulk of the mountains still hung above us. We made camp on the porch of a great standing rock, as though protection at our backs would avail us of something if the night went badly. The fire had only just taken hold, and the sun had dipped below the rim of the hills a moment before, when a cold wind made the branches of the trees whip back and forth. We knew, without speaking, without looking at one another, that the creature had come. Have you made your decision?
The harsh voice from the trees sounded strange, as if its owner was trying to speak lightly, carelessly, but I only heard death in those cold syllables.
We have,
said Ibn Fahad, drawing himself up out of his involuntary half-crouch to stand erect.
We will accept your wager. Do you wish to begin?
Oh, no, the thing said and made a flapping noise.
That would take all of the suspense from the contest, would it not? No, I insist that you begin.
I am first, then, Ibn Fahad said, looking around our circle for confirmation. The dark shape moved abruptly toward us. Before we could scatter, the vampire stopped a few short steps away.
Do not fear,
it grated. Close to one's ear, the voice was even odder and more strained.
I have come nearer to hear the story and see the teller, for surely that is part of any tale. But I shall move no farther. Begin.
Everybody but myself stared into the fire, hugging their knees, keeping their eyes averted from the bundle of darkness that sat at our shoulders. I had the fire between myself and the creature and felt safer than if I had sat like Walid and Abdallah, with nothing between the beast and my back but cold ground. The vampire sat hunched as if imitating our posture, its eyes hooded so that only a flicker of scarlet light like a half-buried brand showed through each slit. It was black, this man-like thing. Not black as an African, mind you, but black as burnt steel, black as the mouth of a cave. It bore the aspect of someone dead of the plague. Rags wrapped it, moldering. Excuse me. Rags wrapped it, moldering filthy bits of cloth, rotten as old bread. But the curve of its back spoke of terrible life, a great black cricket poised to jump. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a quick sip there after sneezing and coughing. Goodness. Okay. Excuse me. Cat fur. Ibn Fahad's story. Many years ago, he began, I traveled for a good time in Egypt. I was indigent then and journeyed wherever the prospect of payment for a sword arm beckoned. I found myself at last in the household guard of a rich merchant in Alexandria. I was happy enough there, and I enjoyed walking in the busy streets so unlike the village in which I was born. One summer evening, I found myself walking down an unfamiliar street. It emptied out into a little square that sat below the front of an old mosque. The square was full of people, merchants and fishwives, a juggler or two, but most of the crowd was drawn up to the facade of the mosque, pressed in close together. At first, as I strolled across the square, I thought prayers were about to begin, but it was still some time until sunset. I wondered if perhaps some notable imam was speaking from the mosque steps, but as I approached, I could see that all the assembly were staring upward, craning their necks back as if the sun itself, on its way to its western mooring, had become snagged on one of the minarets. But instead of the sun, what stood on the onion-shaped dome was the silhouette of a man who seemed to be staring out toward the horizon. "Who is that?" I asked a man near me. "It is Harud al-Emwiya, the Sufi," the man told me, never lowering his eyes from the tower above. "Is he caught up there?" I demanded. "Will he not fall?" "Watch," was all the man said. I did. A moment later, much to my horror, the small, dark figure of Harud, the Sufi, seemed to go rigid, then toppled from the minaret's rim like a stone. I gasped in shock, and so did a few others around me, but the rest of the crowd only stood in hushed attention. Then an incredible thing happened.
The tumbling holy man spread his arms out from his shoulders like a bird's wings, and his downward fall became a swooping glide. He bottomed out high above the crowd, then sped upward, riding the wind like a leaf, spinning, somersaulting, stopping at last to drift to the ground as gently as a bit of eider down. Meanwhile, all the assembly was chanting, "God is great! God is great!" When the Sufi had touched the earth with his bare feet, the people surrounded him, touching his rough woolen garments and crying out his name. He said nothing, only stood and smiled, and before too long the people began to wander away, talking amongst themselves. "But this is truly marvelous," I said to the man who stood by me. "Before every holy day he flies," the man said and shrugged. "I am surprised this is the first time you have heard of Harud al-Anbiya." I was determined to speak to this amazing man, and as the crowd dispersed, I approached and asked if I might buy him a glass of tea. Close up, he had a look of seamed roguishness that seemed surprising, placed against the great favor in which Allah must have held him. He smilingly agreed and accompanied me to a tea shop close by in the Street of Weavers. "How is it, if you will pardon my forwardness, that you of all holy men are so gifted?" He looked up from the tea cupped in his palms and grinned. He had only 2 teeth. "Balance," he said. I was surprised. "A cat has balance," I responded, "but they nevertheless must wait for the pigeons to land." "I refer to a different sort of balance," he said, "the balance between Allah and Shaitan, which, as you know, Allah the All-Knowing has created as an equilibrium of exquisite delicacy." "Explain, please, Master." I called for wine, but Harud refused any himself. "In all things, care must be exercised," he explained. "Thus it is too with my flying. Many men holier than I are as earth-bound as stones. Many other men have lived so poorly as to shame the devil himself, yet they cannot take to the air either. Only I, if I may be excused what sounds self-satisfied, have discovered perfect balance. Thus each year before the holy days I tot up my score carefully, committing small peccadillos or acts of faith as needed until the balance is exactly balanced. Thus, when I jump from the mosque, neither Allah nor the arch-enemy has claim on my soul, and they bear me up until a later date, at which time the issue shall be clearer." He smiled again and drained his tea. "You are a sort of chessboard on which God and the devil contend?" I asked, perplexed. "A flying chessboard, yes." We talked for a long while as the shadows grew across the Street of the Weavers, but the Sufi Harud adhered stubbornly to his explanation. I must have seemed disbelieving, for he finally proposed that we ascend to the top of the mosque so he could demonstrate. I was more than a little drunk, and he, imbibing only tea, was filled nonetheless with a strange gleefulness. We made our way up the many winding stairs and climbed out onto the narrow ledge that circled the minaret like a crown. The cool night air and the thousands of winking lights of Alexandria far below sobered me rapidly. "I suddenly find all your precepts very sound," I said. "Let us go down." But Harud would have none of it, and proceeded to step lightly off the edge of the dome. He hovered like a bumblebee 100 feet above the dusty street. "Balance," he said with great satisfaction. "But," I asked, "is the good deed of giving me this demonstration enough to offset the pride with which you exhibit your skill?" I was cold and wanted to get down and hoped to shorten the exhibition. Instead, hearing my question, Harud screwed up his face as though it was something he had not given thought to.
A moment later, with a shriek of surprise, he plummeted down out of my sight to smash on the mosque's stone steps, as dead as dead. Ibn Fahad, having lost himself in remembering the story, poked at the campfire. Thus, the problem with matters of delicate balance, he said, and shook his head. The whispering rustle of our dark visitor brought us sharply back. Interesting, the creature rasped. Sad? Yes. Sad enough? We shall see. Who is the next of your number? A cold chill like fever swept over me at those calm words. I am next, said Fawn, voice taut as a bowstring. Shall I begin? The vampire said nothing, only bobbed the black lump of his head. The youth cleared his throat and began. There was once, Fawn began and hesitated, then started again. There was once a young prince named Zulfikar, the second son of a great sultan. Seeing no prospects for himself in his father's kingdom, he went out into the wild world to search for his fortune. He traveled through many lands and saw many strange things and heard tell of others stranger still. In one place, he was told of a nearby sultanate, the ruler of which had a beautiful daughter, his only child and the very apple of his eye. Now this country had been plagued for several years by a terrible beast, a great white leopard of a kind never seen before. So fearsome it was that it had killed hunters set to trap it. Yet was it also so cunning that it had stolen babies from their very cradles as the mothers lay sleeping. The people of the Sultanate were all in fear, and the Sultan, whose best warriors had tried and failed to kill the beast, was driven to despair. Finally, at the end of his wits, he had it proclaimed in the marketplace that the man who could destroy the white leopard would be gifted with the Sultan's daughter, Rasoriel, and with her the throne of the Sultanate after the old man was gone. Young Zulfikar heard how the best young men of the country and others from countries beyond, one after the other, had met their deaths beneath the claws of the leopard, or in its jaws. Here I saw the boy falter, as if the vision of flashing teeth he was conjuring had suddenly reminded him of our predicament. Walid the under-vizier reached out and patted the lad's shoulder with great gentleness until he was calm enough to resume. So young Prince Zulfikar took himself into that country and soon was announced at the Sultan's court. The ruler was a tired old man, the fires in his sunken eyes long quenched. Much of the power seemed to have been handed over to a pale, narrow-faced youth named Sifaz, who was the princess's cousin. As Zulfikar announced his purpose, as so many had done before him, Sifaz's eyes flashed. You will no doubt meet the end that all the others have, but you are welcome to the attempt. And the prize, should you win? Then, for the first time, Zulfikar saw the Princess Rasoriel, and in an instant his heart was overthrown. She had hair as black and shiny as polished jet, and a face upon which Allah himself must have looked in satisfaction, thinking, here is the summit of my art. Her delicate hands were like tiny doves as they nested in her lap, and a man could fall into her brown eyes and drown without hope of rescue, which is what Zulfikar did, and he was not wrong when he thought he saw Rasoriel return his ardent gaze. Sifaz saw too, and his thin mouth turned in something like a smile, and he narrowed his yellow eyes. Take this princeling to his room, that he may sleep now and wake with the moon. The leopard's cry was heard around the palace's walls last night. Indeed, when Zulfikar woke in the evening darkness, it was to hear the choking cry of the leopard beneath his very window. As he looked out, buckling on his scabbard, it was to see a white shape slipping in and out of the shadows in the garden below. He also took his dagger in his hand and leaped over the threshold. He had barely touched ground when, with a terrible snarl, the leopard bounded out of the obscurity of the hedged garden wall and came to a stop before him. It was huge, bigger than any leopard Zulfikar had seen or heard of, and its pelt gleamed like ivory. It leaped, claws flashing, and he could barely throw himself down in time as the beast passed over him like a cloud, touching him only with its hot breath. It turned and leaped again as the palace dog set up a terrible barking, and this time its talons raked his chest, knocking him tumbling. Blood started from his shirt, spouting so fiercely that he could scarcely draw himself to his feet. He was caught, with his back against the garden wall. The leopard slowly moved toward him, yellow eyes like tallow lamps burning in the niches of hell. Suddenly there was a crashing at the far end of the garden. The dogs had broken down their stall and were even now speeding through the trees. The leopard hesitated. Zulfikar could almost see it thinking, and then with a last snarl it leaped onto the wall and disappeared into the night. Zulfikar was taken, his wounds bound, and he was put into his bed. The Princess Rasoril, who had truly lost her heart to him, wept bitterly at his side, begging him to go back to his father's land and to give up the fatal challenge. But Zulfikar, weak as he was, would no more think of yielding than he would of theft or treason, and refused, saying he would hunt the beast again the following night. Sifaz grinned and led his cousin the princess away. Zulfikar thought he heard the Pale One whistling as he went. In the dark before dawn, Zulfikar, who could not sleep owing to the pain of his injury, heard his door quietly open. He was astonished to see the princess come in, gesturing him to silence. When the door was closed, she threw herself down at his side and covered his hand and cheek with kisses, proclaiming her love for him and begging him again to go. He admitted his love for her, but reminded her that his honor would not permit him to stop short of his goal, even should he die in the trying. Rasoril, seeing that there was no changing the young prince's mind, then took from her robe a black arrow, tipped in silver, fletched with the tail feathers of a falcon. "Then take this," she said. "This leopard is a magic beast, and you will never kill it otherwise. Only silver will pierce its heart. Take the arrow, and you may fulfill your oath." So saying, she slipped out of his room. The next night, Zulfikar heard again the leopard's voice in the garden below, but this time he took also his bow and arrow when he went to meet it. At first he was loath to use it, since it seemed somehow unmanly, but when the beast had again given him an injury, and he had struck 3 sword blows in turn without effect, he at last knocked the silver-pointed shaft on his bowstring, and, as the beast charged him once more, let fly. The black arrow struck to the leopard's heart. The creature gave a hideous cry and again leaped the fence, this time leaving a trail of its mortal blood behind it. When morning came, Zulfikar went to the Sultan for men so that they could follow the track of blood to the beast's lair and prove its death. The Sultan was displeased when his vizier, the princess's pale cousin, did not answer his summons. As they were all going down into the garden, though, there came a great cry from the sleeping rooms upstairs, a cry like a soul in mortal agony. With fear in their hearts, Zulfikar, the Sultan, and all the men rushed upstairs. There they found the missing Sifaz. The pale man lifted a shaking, red-smeared finger to point at Zulfikar as all the company stared in horror. "He has done it! The foreigner!" Sifaz shouted. In Sifaz's arms lay the body of the Princess Rasoriel, a black arrow standing from her breast. After Fawn finished, there was a long silence. The boy, his own courage perhaps stirred by his story, seemed to sit straighter.
"Ah,"
the vampire said at last.
"Love and its prices. That is the message? Or is it perhaps the effect of silver on the supernatural? Fear not. I am bound by no such conventions, and fear neither silver, steel, nor any other metal."
The creature made a huffing, scraping sound that might have been a laugh. I marveled anew, even as I felt the skein of my life fraying, that it had so quickly gained such command of our unfamiliar tongue.
"Well," it said slowly, "sad, but sad enough. Again, that is the important question. Who is your last contestant?"
Now my heart truly went cold within me, and I sat as though I had swallowed a stone. Walid al-Salameh spoke up.
"I am," he said, and took a deep breath. "I am."
The vizier's story.
"This is a true story, or so I was told. It happened in my grandfather's time, and he had it from someone who knew those involved. He told it to me as a cautionary tale. There once was an old caliph, a man of rare gifts and good fortune. He ruled a small country, but a wealthy one, a country upon which all the gifts of Allah had been showered in grand measure. He had the finest heir a man could have, dutiful yet courageous, beloved by the people almost as extravagantly as the caliph himself. He had many other fine sons, and 200 beautiful wives, and an army of fighting men, the envy of his neighbors. His treasury was stacked roof-beam high with gold and gemstones and blocks of fragrant sandalwood, crisscrossed with ivories and bolts of the finest silk. His palace was built around a spring of fragrant clear water, and everyone said that they must be the very waters of life, so fortunate and well-loved this caliph was. His only sadness was that age had robbed his sight from him, leaving him blind. But hard as this was, it was a small price to pay for Allah's beneficence. One day the caliph was walking in his garden, smelling the exquisite fragrance of the blossoming orange trees. His son, the prince, unaware of his father's presence, was also in the garden, speaking with his mother, the caliph's first and chiefest wife. "He is terribly old," the wife said. "I cannot stand even to touch him anymore. It is a horror to me." "You are right, mother," the son replied as the caliph hid behind the trees and listened, shocked. "I am sickened by watching him sitting all day, drooling into his bowl or staggering sightless through the palace. But what are we to do?" "I have thought long and hard on it," the caliph's wife replied. "We owe it to ourselves and those close to us to kill him." "Kill him?" the son replied. "Well, it is hard for me, but I suppose you are right. I still feel some love for him, though. May we at least do it quickly, so that he shall not feel pain at the end." "Very well. But do it soon, tonight even. If I must feel his foul breath upon me one more night, I will die myself." "Tonight, then," the son agreed, and the two walked away, leaving the blind caliph shaking with rage and terror behind the orange trees. He could not see what sat on the garden path behind them, the object of their discussion, the wife's old lapdog, a scrofulous creature of extreme age.
Thus the caliph went to his vizier, the only one he was sure he could trust in a world of suddenly traitorous sons and wives, and bade him to have the pair arrested and quickly beheaded. The vizier was shocked and asked the reason why, but the caliph only said he had unassailable proof that they intended to murder him and take his throne. He bade the vizier go and do the deed. The vizier did as he was directed, seizing the son and his mother quickly and quietly, then giving them over to the headsman after tormenting them for confessions and the names of confederates, neither of which were forthcoming. Sadly, the vizier went to the caliph and told him it was done, and the old man was satisfied. But soon, inevitably, word of what had happened spread, and the brothers of the heir began to murmur among themselves about their father's deed. Many thought him mad, since the dead pair's devotion to the caliph had been common knowledge. Word of this dissension reached the caliph himself, and he began to fear for his life, terrified that his other sons meant to emulate their treasonous brother. He called the vizier to him and demanded the arrest of these sons and their beheading. The vizier argued in vain, risking his own life, but the caliph would not be swayed. At last the vizier went away, returning later a battered, shaken man. "It is done, O prince," he said. "All your sons are dead." The caliph had only a short while in which to feel safe before the extreme wrath of the wives over the slaughter of their children reached his ears. "Destroy them too," the blind caliph insisted. Again the vizier went away, soon to return. "It is done, O prince," he reported. "Your wives have been beheaded." Soon the courtiers were crying murder, and the caliph sent his vizier to see them dealt with as well. "It is done, O prince," he assured the caliph. But the ruler now feared the angry townspeople, so he commanded his vizier to take the army and slaughter them. The vizier argued feebly, then went away. "It is done, O prince," the caliph was told a month later. But now the caliph realized that with his heirs and wives gone and the important men of the court dead, it was the soldiers themselves who were a threat to his power. He commanded his vizier to sow lies amongst them, causing them to fall out and slay each other, then locked himself in his room to safely outlast the conflict. After a month and a half, the vizier knocked upon his door. "It is done, O prince." For a moment the caliph was satisfied. All his enemies were dead, and he himself was locked in. No one could murder him or steal his treasure or usurp his throne. The only person yet alive who even knew where the caliph hid was his vizier. Blind, he groped about for the key with which he had locked himself in. Better first to remove the risk that someone might trick him into coming out. He pushed the key out beneath the door and told the vizier to throw it away somewhere it might never be found. When the vizier returned, he called him close to the locked portal that bounded his small world of darkness and safety. "Vizier," the caliph said through the keyhole, "I command you to go and kill yourself, for you are the last living one who is a threat to me." "Kill myself, my prince?" the vizier asked, dumbfounded. "Kill myself?" "Correct," the caliph said. "Now go and do it. That is my command." There was a long silence. At last the vizier said, "Very well." After that, there was more silence. For a long time, the caliph sat in his blindness and exulted, for everyone he distrusted was gone. His faithful vizier had carried out all his orders and now had killed himself. A sudden horrible thought came to him then. What if the vizier had not done what he had told him to do? What if instead he had made compact with the caliph's enemies and was only reporting false details when he told of their deaths? How was the caliph to know? He almost swooned with fright and anxiousness at the realization. At last he worked up the courage to feel his way across the locked room to the door. He put his ear to the keyhole and listened. He heard nothing but silence. He took a breath and then put his mouth to the hole. "Vizier," he called in a shaky voice, "have you done what I commanded? Have you killed yourself?" "It is done, O Prince," came the reply. Finishing his story, which was fully as dreadful as it was sad, the under-vizier Walid lowered his head as if ashamed or exhausted. We waited tensely for our guest to speak. At the same time, I am sure we all vainly hoped there would be no more speaking, that the creature would simply vanish like a frightening dream that flees the sun. "Rather than discuss the merits of your sad tales," the black, tattered shadow said at last, confirming that there would be no waking from this dream. "Rather than argue the game with only one set of moves completed, perhaps it is now time for me to speak. The night is still youthful and my tale is not long, but I wish to give you a fair time to render judgment." As he spoke, the creature's eyes bloomed scarlet like unfolding roses. The mist curled up from the ground beyond the fire circle, wrapping the vampire in a cloak of writhing fogs, a rotted black egg in a bag of silken mesh. "May I begin?" it asked, but no one could say a word. "Very well." The vampire's story. The tale I will tell is of a child born of an ancient city on the banks of a river. So long ago this was that not only has the city itself long gone to dust, but the later cities built atop its ruins, tiny towns and great walled fortresses of stone, all these too have gone beneath the mill wheels of time, rendered, like their predecessor, into the finest of particles to blow in the wind, silting the timeless river's banks. This child lived in a mud hut, thatched with straw, and played with his fellows in the shallows of the sluggish brown river, while his mother washed the family's clothes and gossiped with her neighbors. Even this ancient city was built upon the bones of earlier cities, and it was into the collapsed remnants of one, a great tumbled mass of shattered sandstone, that the child and his friends sometimes went. And it was to these ruins that the child, when he was a little older, almost the age of your young romantic companion, took a pretty doe-eyed girl. It was to be his first time beyond the veil, his initiation into the mysteries of women. His heart beat rapidly. The girl walked ahead of him, her slender brown body tiger-striped with light and shade as she walked among the broken pillars. Then she saw something and screamed. The child came running. The girl was nearly mad, weeping and pointing. He stopped in amazement, staring at the black, shriveled thing that lay on the ground. A twisted something that might have been a man once,
wizened and black as a piece of leather, dropped into the cook fire. Then the thing opened its eyes. The girl ran, choking, but he, the child, did not, seeing that the black thing could not move. The twitching of its mouth seemed that of someone trying to speak. He thought he heard a faint voice asking for help, begging for him to do something. He leaned down to the near silent hiss, and the thing squirmed and bit him, fastening its sharp teeth like barbed fish hooks in the muscle of his leg. The man-child screamed, helpless, and felt his blood running out into the horrible, sucking mouth of the thing. Fetid saliva crept into the wounds and coursed hotly through his body, even as he struggled against his writhing attacker. The poison climbed through him, and it seemed he could feel his own heart flutter and die within his chest, delicate and hopeless as a broken bird. With final, desperate strength, the child pulled free. The black thing, mouth gaping, curled on itself and shuddered like a beetle on a hot stone. A moment later, it crumbled into ashes and oily flakes. But it had caught me long enough to destroy me, for of course I was that child, to force its foul fluids into me, leaching my humanity and replacing it with the hideous, unwanted wine of immortality. My child's heart became an icy fist. Thus was I made what I am at the hands of a dying Granpere, which had been a creature like I am now, worn down at last by the passing of eons. It had chosen a host to receive its hideous malady, then died, as I shall do someday, no doubt, in the grip of some terrible blind insect-like urge. But not soon, not today. So that child, which had been in all ways like other children, loved by its family, loving in turn noise and games and sweetmeats, became a dark thing sickened by the burning light of the sun. Driven into the damp shadows beneath stones and the dusty gloom of abandoned places, then driven out again beneath the moon by an unshakable, unresistible hunger, I fed first on my family. My uncomprehending mother wept to see her child return standing by her moonlit pallet. Then on the others of my city. Not last nor least painful of my feedings was on the dark-haired girl who had run when I stayed behind. I slashed other throats too, and lapped up warm, sea-salty blood while the trapped child inside me cried without sound. It was as though I stood behind a screen, unable to leave or interfere as terrible crimes were committed before me. And thus the years have passed. Sand grains deposited along the river bank, uncountable in their succession. Every one has contained a seeming infinitude of killings, each one terrible despite their numbing similarity. Only the blood of mankind will properly feed me, and 100 generations or more have known terror of me. Strong as I am, virtually immortal, unkillable as far as I know or can tell. Blades pass through me like smoke. Fire, water, poison, none affect me. Still, the light of the sun causes a pain to me so excruciating that you, with only mortal lives whose pain at least eventually ends in death, cannot possibly comprehend it. Thus, kingdoms of men have risen and fallen to ashes since I last saw daylight. Think only on that for a moment if you seek sad stories. I must be in darkness when the sun rises, so as I range in search of prey, my accommodations are shared with toads and slugs, bats, and blindworms. People can be nothing to me anymore but food. I know of none other like myself, save the dying creature who spawned me. The smell of my own corruption is in my nostrils always. So, there is all of my tale. I cannot die until my time is come, and who can know when that is? Until then, I will be alone, alone as no mere man can ever be, alone with my wretchedness and evil and self-disgust until the world collapses and is born anew. The vampire rose now, towering up like a black sail, billowing in the wind, spreading its vast arms or wings on either side as if to sweep us before it. How do your stories compare to this? It cried, the harshness of its speech somehow muted, even as it grew louder and louder. Whose is the saddest story, then? There was pain in that hideous voice that tore at even my fast-pounding heart. Whose is saddest? Tell me. It is time to judge. And in that moment, of all the moments when lying could save my life, I could not lie. I turned my face away from the quivering black shadow, that thing of rags and red eyes. None of the others around the campfire spoke. Even Abdallah, the clerk, only sat hugging his knees, teeth chattering, eyes bulging with fear. I thought so, the thing said at last. I thought so. Night wind tossed the tree limbs above our heads, and it seemed as though beyond them stood only ultimate darkness, no sky, no stars, nothing but unending emptiness. Very well, the vampire said at last. Your silence speaks all. I have won. There was not the slightest note of triumph in its voice. Give me my prize, and then I may let the rest of you flee my mountain. The dark shape withdrew a little way. We, all of us, turned to look at one another, and it was just as well that the night veiled our faces. I started to speak, but Ibn Fahad interrupted me, his voice a tortured rasp. Let there be no talk of volunteering. We will draw lots. That is the only way. Quickly he cut a thin branch into 5 pieces, one of them shorter than the rest, and cupped them in a closed hand. Pick, he said, I will keep the last. As a part of me wondered what madness it was that had left us wagering on storytelling and drawing lots for our lives, we each took a length from Ibn Fahad's fist. I kept my hand closed while the others selected, not wanting to hurry Allah toward his revelation of my fate. When all had selected, we extended our hands and opened them, palms up. Fawn had selected the short stick.
Strangely, there was no sign of his awful fortune on his face. He showed no signs of grief. Indeed, he did not even respond to our helpless words and prayers, only stood up and slowly walked toward the huddled black shape at the far edge of the clearing. The vampire rose to meet him. "No!" came a sudden cry, and to our complete surprise, the clerk, Abdallah, leaped to his feet and went pelting across the open space, throwing himself between the youth and the looming shadow. "He is too young!" Abdallah shouted, sounding truly anguished. "Do not do this horrible thing! Take me instead!" Ibn Fahad, the vizier, and I could only sit, struck dumb by this unexpected behavior, but the creature moved swiftly as a viper, smacking Abdallah to the ground with one flicking gesture. "You are indeed mad, you short-lived men," the vampire hissed. "This one would do nothing to save himself. Not once did I hear his voice raised in tale-telling. Yet now he would throw himself into the jaws of death for this other? Mad!" The monster left Abdallah choking on the ground and turned to Silent Fawn. "Come, you. I have won the contest, and you are the prize. I am sorry it must be this way." A great swath of darkness enveloped the youth, drawing him in. "Come," the vampire said. "Think of the better world you go to. That is what you believe, do you not? Well, soon you shall." The creature broke off. "Why do you look so strangely, man-child?" the thing said at last, its voice troubled. "You cry, but I see no fear. Why? Are you not afraid of dying?" Fawn answered. His tones were oddly distracted. Have you really lived so long? And alone? Always alone?" "I told you, I have no reason to lie. Do you think to put me off with your strange questions?" "Oh, how could the good God be so unmerciful?" The words were made of sighs. The dark shape that embraced him stiffened. "Do you cry for me? For me?" "How can I help?" the boy said. "Even Allah must weep for you, for such a pitiful thing, lost in the lonely darkness." For a moment, the night air seemed to pulse. Then, with a wrenching gasp, the creature flung the youth backward so that he stumbled and fell before us, landing atop the groaning Abdallah. "Go!" the vampire shrieked, and its voice cracked and boomed like thunder. "Get you gone from my mountains! Go!" Amazed, we pulled Fawn and the chief clerk to their feet and went stumbling down the hillside, branches lashing at our faces and hands, expecting any moment to hear the rush of wings and feel cold breath on our necks. "Build your houses well, little men," a voice howled like the wild wind behind us. "My life is long, and someday I may regret letting you go." We ran and ran until it seemed the life would flee our bodies, until our lungs burned and our feet blistered, and until the topmost sliver of the sun peered over the eastern summits. Masrur al-Adan allowed the tale's ending to hang in silence for a span of 30 heartbeats, then pushed his chair away from the table. "We escaped the mountains the next day," he said.
Within a season, we were back in Baghdad, the only survivors of the caravan to the Armenites. Ah! Breathed young Hassan, a long, drawn-out sound full of wonder and apprehension. What a marvelous, terrifying adventure! I would never have survived it myself. How frightening! And did the creature, did he really say he might come back someday? Masrur solemnly nodded, his large head. Upon my soul! Am I not right, Ibn Fahad, my old comrade? Ibn Fahad yielded a thin smile, seemingly of affirmation. Yes, Masrur continued, yes, those words chill me to this very day. Many is the night I have sat in this room, looking at that door, he pointed, and wondering if someday it may open to show me that terrible, misshapen black thing come back from hell to make good on our wager. Merciful Allah, Hassan gasped. Abu Jamir leaned across the table as the other guests whispered excitedly. He wore a look of annoyance. Good Hassan, he snapped, kindly calm yourself. We're all grateful to our host Masrur for entertaining us, but it is an insult to sensible, godly men to suggest that at any moment some blood-drinking Afrit may knock down the door and carry us. Boom! The door leaped open with a crash, revealing a hideous, twisted shape looming in the entrance, red splattered and trembling. The shrieking of Masrur's guests filled the room. Master? The dark silhouette quavered. Baba, the servant, held a wine jar balanced on one shoulder. The other had broken at his feet, splashing Abu Jamir's prize stock everywhere. Master, he began again, I am afraid I have dropped one. Masrur looked down at Abu Jamir, who lay pitched full length on the floor, insensible. Ah, well, that's all right, Baba. Masrur smiled, twirling his black mustache. We don't have to make the wine go so far as I thought. It seems my storytelling has put some of our guests to sleep. And that's the end. Sorry for all the coughing and sneezing. It was not COVID symptoms, I promise you. It's cat hair and raspy voiced characters. So, anyway, I want to thank you so much for joining me. It's almost getting near 10 after 10 now, and I am going to go tripping merrily away, trip, 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 tiptoeing through the tulips, or whatever else we happen to have around in the way of ground cover. And I will leave you to the rest of your Sunday evening, or whatever time it is where you are. Tash said, damn, I missed the beginning. Remember, the beginning of it is on the recorded on my Facebook page, so you can go back and see the beginning part if you want to, and see all the exciting faces I pull, and see all the weird wrinkles that move around on my face, and all that other cool stuff. Anyway, I want to thank all my friends and readers and those who are both, which many of you, if not most of you, if not all of you are, and say thank you once more for joining me. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, take care of your friends, take care of your neighbors, take care of strangers, because those strangers are someone else's friends, loved ones, and we're all family. And so with that, I thank you. Please come back and join me next Sunday, in which I will be doing my usual 2 a.m. in the morning PDT and 7 p.m. at night PDT. I have no idea what I'm going to read, but I will figure something out. And you can always send me suggestions on my website, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere. Love to hear from you. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.